Um, but just a little bit about myself. My name is Hunter Bickers. I'm one of the counselors here at Penfield. I came through this program back in February of 2018. Unlike some of the other staff, I'm actually from here in Greene County. I grew up in White Plains, about 20 minutes away. Was living in Atlanta prior to coming here, and was drinking a lot and got to where I couldn't manage it. Had gotten arrested a few times for drinking and driving. Came back home, came back here, and my family members informed me that there was a treatment center in Penfield, which I did not believe. I don't know if you've noticed, but we're kind of in the middle of nowhere. And I said, no, there's not. And turns out they were right. I told them, you're right, there is a treatment center, but I'm not going. I refused to go. I wasn't having it. I didn't think I had a problem. I thought I could handle everything on my own. Luckily, due to some ultimatums, I ended up come here, and then I was going to do my 6 weeks here, and then I was going right back to Atlanta. And now, coming up on 4 years later almost, they can't get rid of me. So what I tell guys is this place will do everything that you let it. Recovery is very much a you get out what you put in kind of thing. But if you sit back, listen, and put forth the effort, your life can be a whole lot better than it used to be. Thank you all so much for coming. You all are part of their support group, right? And the support group is going to be so vital for these guys in the future, right? Ultimately, you guys will hear this in different meetings like Al-Anon, but you can't control this, you didn't cause it, and you can't cure it. But at the same time, you can help. The more that you all know, the better you're equipped to help these men later on in their recovery. The more you know, the better resource you are to talk with them, ask them how they're doing, ask them how they're feeling. If you notice that maybe something's going on or maybe they're skipping out on things, you have that ability to speak with them and hopefully get somewhere and figure out what's going on. Because recovery, especially early on, can be a little bit difficult. There are a lot of highs and lows. And after a while, that will stabilize, but the more help and the more love we have around us, the better we can navigate through that. So today, I'm going to speak about a number of aspects of addiction. So typically, addiction is seen as a biopsychosocial spiritual disease. And I'm going to hit all of those today. One question, too, that a lot of people will have is, what causes addiction? And there really is no good answer. There are so many different ways that addiction can develop and progress within an individual. But I will hit a couple of the main themes that are found as far as causes of addiction. So first off, there can be a genetic presence. So there have been many studies done on the heritability of addiction. If family members have addiction, that can be passed down. There are also certain genes linked to the liver and how it processes certain enzymes and how that can develop into alcoholism or make it easier for one to become an alcoholic. There are also a number of psychological factors. There are a number of personality factors that tend to guide one into addiction. Personality factors like impulsivity, sensation-seeking, thrill-seeking. And obviously the big one that a lot of people hear about are trauma and abuse. There is a very heavy and well-documented link between trauma and substance abuse. Whether it be significant things happened as a child or as an adult. One thing that we do here is all the clients here take what's called the ACE test. ACE stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. So the ACE test was developed a handful of years ago by the CDC and Kaiser Permanente, which is kind of weird. But they developed a test of 10 questions. They're all yes or no, and they all refer to 18 years old and younger. And there are about a number of different types of traumatic experiences. Abuse, both physical and sexual, divorce, family members with mental health issues, family members doing time in jail or prison. And what they found was that answering yes to a certain number of those questions can make one more susceptible to addiction. The magic number for that test is 4. If somebody answers yes to 4 or more of those questions, they are more susceptible to a number of negative health outcomes. Liver disease, heart disease, lung cancer, certain sexually transmitted diseases. There are certain mental disorders that are more prevalent with people that answer yes to 4 or more of those questions. So for example, with an ACE test score of 4 or more, so that's answering yes to 4 or more of those questions, A person's risk factor for lung disease goes up 390%. Their risk factors for hepatitis goes up 240%. Their risk factor for developing clinical depression goes up 460%. And their chances of attempting suicide go up 1,220%. So the big nugget that's taken from all that is what happens to us when we are young can actually affect us later on in life. And that's kind of the studied proof of that. And so one thing we work on here and one thing we teach here is, yes, maybe it did, but it doesn't have to keep affecting us later in life, right? We can look back in our past and point to certain things and say, yeah, that helped me get to where I am today, but that particular incident or that particular period of time does not have to keep affecting me later on in life. And so we work a lot with guys on working through that trauma, whether it be as a child or as an adult, working through that, processing through that, so we stop carrying it with us everywhere we go. We can leave it there behind us and continue moving forward. Also, as far as psychological ways addiction can progress and develop, certain mental health factors, things like clinical depression, generalized anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, which does go back to trauma. Different mental disorders can make one more susceptible to developing addiction because we like to use medicine. And if I feel very anxious and I notice that drinking reduces my anxiety, I'm going to keep doing it. Or if I feel very depressed and taking this one particular pill makes me happy and not depressed anymore, chances are I'm going to keep doing that. And then two more things that can help cause addiction, accessibility factors. If there is a lot of alcohol or drugs present in the home when one is growing up, they're more likely to develop addiction. And also peer groups. One thing I do say to these guys a lot is show me who you're walking with and I'll show you your future. If we hang out with people that are engaging in risky behavior, or using drugs or drinking heavily, chances are we're going to do those things as well. So our peer group, both in the past to help us get here, and our peer group moving forward in recovery are going to play a very large role in how we can do once we get out of Penfield, right? If we find healthy people and hang out with healthy people, chances are we're going to do healthy things. So we have to remember that and stick to that in recovery. Any questions so far? I do get to where I can kind of speak kind of fast, so please don't hesitate to slow me down. So what we're going to start off with is talking a little bit about the psychological aspect of addiction. So we have a model that we use here at Penfield. If my PowerPoint will start working correctly. And we've developed this model. We call it the dynamics of the exiled self. So I believe it's in the second page of the packet that I handed you guys. So what we start out is our true self, right? That's the man that God intended for us to be. That is the loving, compassionate, helpful, supportive father, husband, man, employee, employer. We start out that way. And then what we find is that trauma typically happens in one person's life, and then that causes us to divert our course in life. And then we start going down a different path than how we originally designed to go. And trauma can have a number of effects, and it also can affect us on a biological level as well. So trauma can affect what's called the amygdala. It sits around the middle of the brain. The amygdala handles our fight or flight response. So if one experiences significant trauma, that amygdala, that area in our brain that controls fight or flight, can be a very easy switch to flip, more easy than the normal person. So when we get triggered by something that reminds us of that traumatic experience, people can be quick to experience a high rate of anxiety, a lot of anger, difficulty coping, or one might begin to dissociate and kind of separate themselves from reality. Trauma can also affect the hippocampus in the brain, which affects memory and learning. So if one is triggered by that traumatic experience, whether they see something, hear something, smell something, the area of our brain that controls memory and learning can also decrease. And trauma can also affect our prefrontal cortex, which sits right up here. And that's you, essentially. That's your thoughts, your actions, your personality. Experiencing significant trauma and then being triggered can cause a decrease in the activity of our prefrontal cortex. So it can kind of slow everything down, but the main part of our brain that can really handle anxiety and stress will shoot way up. But what we find is that once guys experience this trauma, there are a number of different stages that they go through. So first, we find that we're not really ourselves, especially in the period of days to weeks to even months after the traumatic experience happens, and we're still kind of finding ourselves. And I meant to say a minute ago that a good way to describe trauma is the brain's inability to cope. In the dictionary, you might find something like a real or perceived threat of injury or harm or death to a person or a loved one. And that's it. But essentially what's going on is your brain doesn't know how to handle the situation. It doesn't know what to do or how to react or what's really going on. And so what it will go down to is what we call the controlling stage. So a unique thing about the brain is the brain seeks what it does not have, and it tends to compensate. So when we're looking at a traumatic experience, the brain's complete inability to handle a situation, what it's going to do is go the other way and try to control everything. And that can look like us trying to be a perfectionist in life, trying to make sure everything's exactly how we want it to be, making sure everything's in place, everything's in order. We're meticulous with our scheduling. Nothing can go wrong, or else we have a complete breakdown of our day. We can get to the point where we're trying to help other people. A lot of these guys can relate to the fact of I wasn't so much focused on myself as I was devoting all my time and energy into other people and making sure that they were okay. Because by focusing on other people and helping them and making sure they're okay, I don't have to look at me. And I don't have to think about this thing that has happened or this time period that has happened in my life. I can solely focus on you and helping you, and I don't have to look inside. Sometimes we can get a little bit judgmental or critical of others, almost just a bit of a negative and irritable attitude. And usually that is just a result of, I've got this thing that's happened to me and I haven't dealt with it, but it's hanging around and it's causing some bad moods and some bad attitudes because I'm just carrying around this traumatic experience with me. And then what we have, what we call the spiritualizer. So what that is not necessarily somebody that's hyper-spiritual, it's somebody that is presenting spirituality that's not genuine. They're projecting a sense of spirituality that they don't necessarily live out or agree with. It's more of a facade of spirituality instead of how they actually feel and what's actually going on inside their hearts. And so what we do is we try to control things. We try to control our whole life. The mind doesn't like having a lack of control, so we go over the top. But what we find is it doesn't work. Whatever that experience might have been, that traumatic experience, is still hanging around and is still following us every single place that we go. So we go down to what we call the medicator stage. So eventually, and these guys can attest to this, we find something that works. For some guys it's a pill, some guys it's a powder, some guys it's a plant, some guys it's a drink. But at some point in time, we have that thing that just makes us go, and then all of a sudden we can breathe. And then all of a sudden that traumatic experience in the past, we don't have to think about it anymore. Taking that drink makes it disappear. Or that stress and that anxiety, when we think back to that period of time in our lives, all of a sudden we don't think about it anymore. We don't have to worry about it. We don't have to deal with it. So naturally, we're going to do it again. If I have this thing in my past and I realize that drinking this alcohol makes that thing go away for a temporary period, I'm 100% going to do that again because that thing has been ruling over me. And so it very much is medicine. It's a bit weird to say, but there's people in this room, men in this room, that may not be in this room if it hadn't been for the drugs and alcohol. They might have chosen a different way. The problem is the medicine's the medicine right up until it's not. And then at that point in time, we no longer have the luxury of choice. The medicine becomes our boss. And the drugs and alcohol, it tells us where to go, tells us where to be, when to be there. We jump as high as it tells us to jump. And any person or thing that gets in between us and the medicine can and must go. And at that point, essentially in our minds, it's not personal, it's just business. That medicine, that drug or that drink controls us. We are compelled to use it. We are no longer choosing to do so. And what can then happen is we'll move into the hopeless stage. And so what I mean by that is eventually we realize we're not calling the shots anymore. I'm not choosing when to drink this alcohol. It's telling me when to drink it. and I just listen. I tell people often, back to my own experiences, it was almost like an out-of-body experience. I was sitting back and watching myself destroy my life, but I was watching it with a blank face and no emotion and not doing anything about it. Almost like I was just watching Netflix. I was just sitting back and watching it all happen and not doing a thing about it. But then I began to realize that maybe I can't so much get out of this. And then we dive into the hopeless stage. We begin to think, I can't change. I'm an alcoholic, and this is just what life looks like for me. This is all I'm ever going to be, or I'm a drug addict, and this is life. This is how it's going to be. Welcome to the rest of my life. We can begin to lose our purpose and lose our drive because of this hopeless sense that we have attained. And a lot of people think, a common thing that you hear is, oh, just stop, just stop, just stop. Well, we begin to realize what's going on, but we can't and we don't know how to get out of it. There's a good chance that before these men came here, they knew exactly what was going on and they hated who they saw in the mirror. But at the same time, we feel hopeless and we feel shame and guilt for what we have gotten ourselves into. We feel shame and guilt for the damage that we've caused, the relationships that we've damaged, the trust we've broken, but we don't know how to get out. And we feel all this shame and guilt, and unfortunately, due to the medicine we've been taking, the only coping mechanism we've developed for shame and guilt is to use more drugs and to drink more alcohol. So we feel shame and we feel guilt. To deal with that shame and guilt, we drink and use drugs more. Then we feel more shame and we feel more guilt, and then we drink and we use drugs more, and we go around and around and around and around. And that's typically somewhere in that cycle or when guys come here. There's no other options. I don't know what to do. I don't know if I can stop. I don't know how to fix this. I've got to do something. I've got to go somewhere. And so one thing that we do with guys is we work on retracing those steps and getting them back to their true self, right? And it's a process, right? It takes time. It takes talking about trauma. It takes working through it, figuring out where we might be stuck in these stories and these traumatic pasts, finding out things that we might be hung on, and working through that. I mean, it can take some time, and these guys can tell you it's not a ton of fun. So we have to talk about things that we don't want to talk about, and a lot of us, when we use drugs and we drink, we're essentially hitting the pause button on all our feelings and all the situations in life. And when you come into a place like this, the play button gets hit, and it can be a lot. All of these memories, all of these relationships, the damage we've done, it can kind of hit us like a tidal wave, and it can be a lot to navigate through at first. But once the waters essentially settle, then we can start picking out the things we need to progress through, working through things, overcoming things, and like I mentioned, we can stop carrying everything with us and leave it behind us, right? I think these guys can agree, right? The goal is to move forward in life, right? So we need to lighten the load. It's really hard to move forward carrying all this weight. So we talk about things and we work through things, and as we do that, we're lightening the load little by little, making it easier to move forward in life. I'm also really bad at flipping through slides. I talked about everything I'm just skipping. So now I'm going to shift into a brief overview of the physiological aspect of addiction. So what we're really looking at here is the biology of addiction and what's actually happening in the brain in the addicted person. So obviously the brain is a very complex structure, and there's a number of different ways you can look at it. There's a number of different areas of the brain, a number of different lobes, a number of different functions. A number of parts have a number of different functions. I'm not a neuroscientist. I have a history degree, so I'm going to keep it very high level. But for the purpose of this, we're going to separate the brain into two distinct parts, which is the neocortex. So when you're looking at a picture of the brain, it's just a squiggly part on the outside, essentially. And the midbrain. The midbrain sits about right around in here. It's just above the brainstem and just below the neocortex. So essentially what the midbrain controls is a lot of our involuntary actions, right? The brain evolved outward. So the farther out you go, the more control you have. Like I mentioned, the prefrontal cortex is our thoughts, our actions, right? As you go farther down, closer to around here, you're getting more into your automatic functions, right? This area of the brain is why you don't have to consciously breathe. It's why you don't have to consciously beat your heart. It's why you don't necessarily consciously blink. That area of the brain essentially just does it all for you. Its main function is just to keep you alive. That's all it's focused on. Food, water, survival. So sitting in this area of the brain, in the midbrain area, we have what are called neurotransmitters. So many of us have probably heard of some of the main characters with neurotransmitters. A lot of us have heard of things like dopamine. A lot of us have heard of things like serotonin, right? Endorphins. And so all these chemicals do is create feelings. So for those of us that have had children, right, when you see your son or daughter hit a home run or perform at the school play, that's dopamine that is getting released inside of your brain. That's pleasure, right? For any of us that exercise, or if you run a lot and you get kind of that runner's high, or if you hit your hand with a hammer, that's endorphins that are released. That's the brain's pain-relieving neurotransmitter. So all of these chemicals are perfectly natural. God designed for us to have them. And our brain is equipped to release these chemicals and help us feel feelings, essentially. And then as we use those levels of those chemicals are replenished. Think about all of these individual neurotransmitters almost essentially having their own little gas tank. And so when I experience something pleasurable, there's a little bit of dopamine that's released, and then my brain is naturally equipped to refill that level. The problem is that when you use drugs and when you use alcohol, you use way more of those chemicals than you're supposed to at a time. For example, hardcore stimulants like cocaine, methamphetamines, they use an exorbitant amount of dopamine when one uses them, way more than your normal pleasurable experiences. For somebody that drinks a lot, we are using a lot more serotonin than our brains are naturally equipped to use on a day-to-day basis. So what begins to happen is the brain essentially begins to have trouble keeping up with the production. We're depleting these gas tanks so low, and especially in addiction, we are depleting them so low and so often, our brain just struggles to keep up. And also at the same time, our midbrain, this area of our mind, or area of our brain rather, that is designed to keep us alive, is beginning to get accustomed to this new level of neurotransmitters we have consistently running through us. So for example, if I'm drinking a lot of alcohol consistently, my brain and my midbrain, the survival part, gets used to a higher level of serotonin being in my brain. It begins to establish that level as a new normal. Or if somebody uses a lot of stimulants, their brain in that midbrain area gets used to a large number of, a high level of dopamine being present within the brain. Same thing with opiates and endorphins, and dopamine as well. And so it gets used to that. But our brain simply has struggles keeping up with the production. So for example, there are a number of men who suffer from alcoholism that find themselves depressed, clinically depressed. The reason for that is because when we use so much serotonin and our brain has struggles with keeping up the production, consistently we tend to be running low when we're not drinking. Serotonin is the happiness neurotransmitter. So when you don't have serotonin, you feel depressed, right? And that's why a lot of the antidepressant medications you hear about today are SSRIs, or selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. They help us have more serotonin, essentially. So when we drink a lot, we're flushing our system of serotonin. When we're not drinking, it's tough for our brain to keep up the production, so we're running on empty, essentially, and that causes one to feel depressed. Or for example, people that take a lot of stimulants, when they're not using stimulants, their dopamine gas tank essentially is running a bit on empty, so it's difficult for them to experience pleasure. They feel a little bit numb. So, but again, back to what I was saying, the midbrain and the survival area of our brain has established a new normal. I'm used to this higher level of dopamine. I'm used to this higher level of serotonin. I'm used to this higher level of endorphins. And again, that area of the brain is designed to keep us alive. So a lot of these guys can attest to the statement of, I woke up this morning and I had no intention of drinking, but I drank. Or I woke up this morning and I had no intention of taking these pills, but I did. And that's where this midbrain structure comes in. It's used to this new normal of neurotransmitters. The midbrain is meant to keep us alive. And so when we dip below that level of neurotransmitters, our midbrain, the survival area of our brain, goes into survival mode, right? For us, I'm not taking that drink, or I'm not taking that pill, or whatever that might look like. But biologically, your midbrain thinks you might be dying. And so it has the unique ability to essentially take over at times and cause us to do things we didn't intend on doing. Because up here, in my decision-making area of the brain, I don't want to drink. But down here, I think I'm dying. I'm used to this level of serotonin, and I'm not getting it. Something must be going wrong. I have to do what it takes. And the midbrain knows. We can associate that drink with that higher level. We can associate that pill with that higher level. And so the midbrain can act without us really even wanting it to, without us even really thinking about it. So there's been plenty of times where people have said, I don't want to use anymore, and they were 100% telling the truth, but a different part of their brain had different plans. And while I get to control this part of my brain, I don't get to control this one. And so, especially in early recovery, guys can be operating at a lower level of these neurotransmitters. But keep in mind, too, they will replenish. With sustained abstinence, right, when we stay in recovery and we're doing everything that we're supposed to be doing, those levels that we've depleted over months to years, they will get back up to what a normal person's looks like. Sometimes it could take 6 to 12 months, maybe even a little bit longer, depending on how often or how much somebody used, depending on what they used as well, but they will replenish. But what can be so dangerous about all of this is the midbrain, survival area of our brain, it never forgets. There was, once upon a time I was a servant leader here, so I was kind of a volunteer/client, and a guy I was a servant leader with went home on a pass. He had been at Penfield for probably about 10 weeks or so, and he was doing great, had every intention of staying in recovery. He was awesome. He was a great guy. Went home, he was going through some old clothes, and he found 2 Xanax in his pocket. He was a Xanax guy. And without thinking about it, he just took them. There was no stopping and thinking. There was no thought process. There was no, maybe I can get away with it. It was just like that. And that's a perfect example of how this particular area can take over and just do something without us being ready for it. And so that will really play into when we're looking at the environment that we put ourselves in post-Penfield, how crucial that's going to be. Because if I surround myself in a setting where I'm around alcohol, or I'm around drugs, or I'm around people I used to use with, or I'm going to places I used to drink at, this area of the brain might take over. Now, essentially, at the time, we can override it, right? I can use my better judgment. But it's going to take time to get good at doing that, is what I'm saying. It's going to take time for us to develop the skills and the stability to be able to resist those urges and those cravings. So essentially, that's what a craving is this area of the brain trying to get back to that level it was once used to. And so we can do it, but we need to set ourselves up for success and take away any type of opportunity for us to see something that triggers this area of the brain and makes it want to jump. Does that make sense? And so here's actually a good example. This graph shows how over time our neurotransmitter levels can begin to deplete. And so once somebody's been using or drinking for a good while, they are essentially just trying to get back to the normal that they were used to. Right? There are a number of guys that take opiates, whether it be heroin or pills or anything like that, that can tell you, I wasn't using to get high anymore, I was just using to feel normal. I was just using to not feel withdrawals. I did not get high anymore. That's because we have damaged our neurotransmitters so much, depleted them, that we're just fighting to get back to normal. But they will replenish, it just takes time. Okay. So now, we'll segue into the social implications of addiction. So the main thing when we think about social aspect of addiction are people, places, things. These guys have heard that phrase 50,000 times since they've been here. People, places, things. People, places, things. People, places, things. And it's important. Just like I mentioned, your environment around you is going to play a big part in the success that you have in early recovery. So if you are around people that you used to drink and use drugs with, there's a good chance you're going to be more susceptible to going and doing those things again. If you go to places that you used to drink at, or go to houses that you used to do drugs at, that's going to make you more susceptible to doing those things again. Things, which is the broadest term in the English language, if you do things or surround yourself with things that remind you of the drug use, remind you of the drinking, there's a good chance you're going to be more susceptible to drinking or using drugs again. So some examples of places, right? Bars, weddings, drug houses, concerts, right? We have to be able to sit down, as people in recovery, these guys need to be able to sit down and identify what places can I not go? Whose house do I need to stay away from? What gas station do I need to skip past, right? What restaurants do I need to bypass, right? What particular events, concerts, sporting events, right? What do I need to bypass? Now, does that mean that we have to skip some of these forever? No. But we need time, especially early on. And these guys know, right? It's going to be important for you all as support group members to also know what places he doesn't need to go to, because he knows, right? So we need to have those conversations. Where can you not go, right? And that way, with the more education we have, if I know that he does not need to go to this restaurant and he calls me and tells me he's going to this restaurant, well, then we need to have a conversation. You know that that's somewhere you don't need to go. Why are you wanting to go there, right? The more we know, the better we can help them, the more we can hold them accountable, right? Or if I say I'm going to this concert and you know that concerts were always very big for me and I used to drink a lot at concerts and I've only been sober for 2 months, then maybe we need to have a conversation. What's making you want to do that? Maybe we should pause that for a little while until you have some more time to get stable. People, another big one. Like I mentioned earlier, show me who you're walking with and I'll show you your future. And we all know, as people in addiction or recovering, what people we do not need to be around. Everybody here has got friends they used to drink with or use with. Everybody's got that drug dealer. Everybody's got that drinking buddy. We all have people, and that could be friends, cousins, brothers, sisters, family members. Some dynamics of relationships will need to change. That doesn't mean there are certain people we can't ever hang out with again, but the nature of our relationship will need to change. And there are some people that we don't need to be friends with anymore. And all of these men know exactly who that is. And so that's another important thing we're going to need to have conversations about. Who do you not need to be around? Who's good for you and who's not? Or who do you have in your life that we need to change what it looks like when you two spend time with each other? We need to have those conversations. That way, if I say, hey, I'm going to hang out with John, and you know that John and I used to drink together a lot, well, maybe we need to have a conversation. And we need to understand that some people in our lives aren't going to be in our lives in recovery. And that can be hard for some of these guys to cope with. But at the end of the day, if somebody's truly my friend and our relationship truly is strong, then that friend would be willing to change the dynamic of our relationship. Does that make sense? This is the slide that everybody hates, or that they hate at least. One of the things we talk about in regard to staying sober and the environment that we surround ourselves in is this. Now I see why that didn't make any sense. The slide didn't change. We talk a lot here about aftercare, right? I've mentioned it a handful of times, but the environment that we surround ourselves in is crucial to our success in recovery. One thing we talk to everybody about are recovery residences. 6 weeks is great. It's not enough. 6 weeks is where we can begin to form a foundation, but there is still an entire house that needs to be built, right? So we talked to a lot of guys about recovery residences, and what those are, they've had different names over the years: sober living home, halfway house. Recovery residences are either groups of homes, standalone houses, or sometimes they're in apartment complexes where guys are living there, kind of in a similar situation. There might be 2 guys to a room. but they're going out and they're working. You go out and you have a job, you work a normal job, but there's a curfew, there's consistent drug and alcohol testing, there's meeting requirements, there's community meetings with everybody at the residence, there's staff there that are trained with addiction and how all this works. So essentially it's that transitionary period. It's not a place like Penfield where it's much more structured and they're in classes and it's essentially recovery college. And it's not the full outside world just yet. It's an intermediary space for me to get used to working and going through daily life, but I also have structure and accountability to allow me to one day ease back in to the outside world instead of just jumping right into it from a place like this. Does that make sense? So it's one thing we talk to everybody about. Everybody's situation is different, and each one of those conversations is individual, and there's a lot of different factors to consider. But it's a conversation worth having if it's feasible. And it's essentially simple logic, right? Yeah, statistics are statistics, but if we step back and think about it, what makes me more likely to succeed? Going back home where there's going to be a lot of people, places, and things that I know I used to associate with drinking or using drugs, or going to a place where I have more structure and accountability, and I'm surrounded by people that are also doing the same thing. A lot of these guys will tell you one of the biggest aspects that makes this place so special is the community, these group of guys. Well, maybe we need to spend a little bit more time with another good group of guys. So something to think about. And to wrap it up, I'm going to talk about the spiritual aspect of addiction. So we cover spirituality a good bit here. The reasoning is we feel that that is very vital in recovery. So if I look at recovery, an addiction, that alcohol or that drug took up a very large portion of my life. So if this is my life and my well-being, once upon a time, alcohol, probably even more than that, took up a very big part of it. And that level might change depending. But alcohol took a very big part of my life. It very much had a relationship with it. It was essentially a part of my family, right? Because I neglected everything so I could spend time with that. When you come to a place like this and you remove alcohol from the equation, I'm essentially walking around kind of empty. There's a void. And so what we work on here is replacing this void with Jesus. A relationship with Him, right? Addiction is a disease of isolation. Guys in here can isolate themselves in a room full of 1,000 people without any problem in the world, right? So connections and bondings are very important in recovery, and there's no greater connection or bond than that with Jesus. And that's one thing we work on here, is developing that relationship, helping us grow in our relationship with Christ, and furthering that and continue to walk in those steps throughout life. And there are a number of different aspects of spirituality I can speak about the program. The guys sit through spirituality classes on a daily basis. We have different staff members that work with them, and we'll do praise and worship services, and the guys go to church, and we'll have Bible studies. A lot of the guys will actually do their own Bible studies outside of the schedule after hours. One thing I want to hit on as far as this aspect is what we call the 4 false beliefs. The guys here sit through a couple different classes on what are called the 4 false beliefs. They come from a book titled The Search for Significance by a man named Robert McGee. And these guys get a pretty heavy dose of it. They have a whole week of classes surrounding these. But essentially what it is spiritually based cognitive behavioral therapy. So in that, we're mixing the spirituality with the clinical side of things. Cognitive behavioral therapy and also rational emotive behavioral therapy, they're all about finding negative thoughts or negative beliefs within our belief system, taking those negative beliefs out and inserting positive and healthy beliefs. And so we work with doing that. We just work with inserting positive spiritual beliefs from a spiritual perspective. But the 4 false beliefs that these guys learn about are called the performance trap, the approval addict, the blame game, and the shame game. And so just a quick overview, the performance trap, all these false beliefs are how we determine our self-worth, where we find our worth from. And the performance trap essentially is I get my self-worth from my performance. So if I perform at a very high level, well, then I feel really good myself. But if I perform at a poor level, whether it be at my job or as a dad or as a husband, I begin to hate myself. And really what we're doing here is we're setting ourselves up for failure because we're humans. We're not going to perform 100% of the time. Nobody's batting 1,000 in life, right? So we're setting ourselves up for failure. We're setting ourselves up to have highs and lows where we love ourselves and we hate ourselves because our performance is consistently going to fluctuate. But one thing we work with guys on and what we talk with guys about is we ask them, does God love you and does God love you despite your performance? And what do you guys say? Yeah? God loves you despite your performance? Exactly. So who are you to put yourself above God and judge yourself on your performance when He doesn't? Right? And granted, that's not what we're consciously thinking, right? When I get really upset and down on myself for a poor performance, I'm not consciously thinking, well, I'm going to put myself above God and judge myself more critically than He does. But in essence, that's what we're doing, right? So what we work with the false beliefs is getting our self-worth from our relationship with God, who loves us and approves of us despite our performance at work, despite our performance at the softball field down there, right? My self-worth and my love for myself comes from my relationship with Him. And then we also have the approval addict, which is the next false belief, and that's essentially exactly how it sounds. My self-worth comes from the way I think other people perceive of me. So if I feel that everybody likes me and everybody approves of me, well, then I like myself more. But if I think that people disapprove of me or people don't like me, then I feel worse about myself. And again, we're setting ourselves up for failure. There's 7 billion people on the world. Not everybody's meant to click, right? Not everybody is going to like us, right? Some people don't even like themselves. How are they going to like you too? So again, we have to ask ourselves, do I believe that God approves of me? I hope that the answer is yes. And if it is, if I know that God approves of me, then what does it really matter what other people think? If I have His approval, I'm here. Granted, it's great for people to like us. It's great for us to build relationships. But if I find that this person doesn't approve of me or doesn't like me, my self-worth stays right here. It doesn't dip, right? Because my self-worth is based on my relationship with God. And if God had a refrigerator, your picture would be on it, right? So that's where I get my self-worth from. And then we have the shame game. So the blame game first. Blame game is also exactly how it sounds. It's where we have that desire for punishment of others, but really more to blame others and to punish others. But really more applicable in this setting is we tend to want to punish ourselves and blame ourselves, right? These guys know what they did. They know the damage they've caused. They know the relationships they've hurt or broken, right? They know the struggles that they've put people through. And so it's very easy for them to want to look inward and kick themselves again while they're down. And what we work with them on the process of forgiveness. Because if I can understand that despite my past, that through conviction and repentance, and I understand that God forgives me, who am I to put myself above God and not forgive myself when He does? Because if our whole goal is to move forward, it's very difficult for me to move forward if my eyes are looking at everything I did in the past. It doesn't mean there's not consequences for our actions. But if I continue to beat myself up, I'm going to continue to cause depression and anxiety and stress. And a lot of these guys will tell you that depression, anxiety, and stress make it really easy for them to use and drink alcohol. So we have to work on moving past that. I tell people all the time, when I refer to my life pre-Penfield, as just a different life. That was just a past life. I don't live that life anymore. That's not me anymore. Did some things I don't love, but that's not who I am today. So I don't have to worry about that when I don't have to worry about doing those things again as long as I keep doing everything I need to do. As long as I keep doing the work to stay the person that I am. And that includes maintaining and working to strengthen my relationship with God. And then finally we have the shame game. So the shame game, more appropriately, would be named the give up game. But kind of what it sounds like is, I am what I am and I cannot change. And that ties back into the whole, I'm a drug addict and that's all I'm ever going to be. Or I'm an alcoholic and that's just all I'm ever going to be. This is just life now. But we have to understand that the greatest example in history that counters that is Jesus coming back and starting his life and doing everything else again. So what we have to understand is that at any point in time, we can start our life over, right? These guys have a unique opportunity to hit the reset button in life that most people don't get. Granted, none of them were probably thrilled to come here, but this is a time where they can hit the reset button and start forward and have everything changed, right? Addiction's unique in the fact that somebody can come on the other side of it better than they even were before they became addicted. It takes work, it takes effort, and it takes discipline. But if we do all of those things and maintain it, and continue to maintain our relationship with God and understand that through Him, I do not have to live the way I was living, then the sky's the limit. Does anybody have any questions? Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to take about a 20-minute break. Feel free to hang out, visit with your loved ones, and then if family members will come back into the dining hall with me, and some of the guys, if you wouldn't mind making us a quick circle before you go out, and then the guys will meet over there, and we'll have a little chat. We'll meet back here at 10:45. Sound good? Thank you.